Testing. What's up, y'all? This demo is to show you how, with the visual effects and compositing knowledge that you have already, whether or not you become a visual effect artist or a compositor, uh, this knowledge doesn't just go away with the course. It actually applies across softwares to a number of things that you might be doing. And I'll show you how that works in the context of exposure and white balance, things you should already know about. So this is not an exposure and white balance demo specifically, more it's to show how you can bounce across different softwares and be flexible and be intuitive and figure things out going forward, no matter what software package you happen to open. So here I'm in Photoshop. I'm gonna hit image adjustments, levels, and I see this representation that you might recognize. I brought it up briefly earlier in the course. When you open your camera and you open its histogram, you'll see a representation of the exposure, the luminance, how many pixels are there are in the red, green, and blue channels, and how bright they are. Generally, when you expose a shot, if things are cut off at the bottom, it means you're losing blacks, and the goal is to set your exposure so that there is a full graph here. And the same thing goes on the other side. If this gets cut off, that means you're overexposed in the whites. You're losing information in the highlights, and that's something that you don't want. So if I go over to an image like this, this is just, I don't know who took this, but obviously they didn't know what they were doing. But if I go here to something from Netflix and we go to adjustments, levels, I'll see that the highlights are preserved, and they chose to actually get rid of or let the darker information go, which is a fine decision. Depends. When you're outdoors, especially, you usually have to choose if you're gonna keep all the information on the ground or if you're gonna keep the information in the sky. Usually, if you expose the sky, the darks get lost in the ground. If you expose the ground, the brights get lost in the sky. So if I go back over here to my levels, I'll see that the brightest point. If I look at it alongside this representation here of the output levels, that the brightest point is actually not pure white. The brightest point is actually this gray down here. So usually, if you have a really great exposure and things are really pushed towards the center of this, you would go into a software and take this and push it down. And as I do that, hold up. Let me make sure the right stuff is selected here. As I do that, boom, there you go. You can see that the white point gets remapped so that anything that was this luminance level is now going to be white. This represents the white point. Cool. And you would do this to make sure that your image has an attractive amount of contrast in it. If I bounce over to Premiere, boom, and I go to Window, Lumetri Scopes. Come on, my friend. I can see a similar representation. You'll notice that this is going from 0 to 255 on this side. It says 0 to 100 over here. There's just different, and when we're in Nuke and compositing, we talk about a 0 to 1 scale. Imagine this being similar to, go to this image, being similar to this graph, except this one is going horizontally and the white point is over here on the right, black point is over here on the left. But if we go over here, the white point would be at the top, black point would be at the bottom. Typically when you output video, as just best practices, you don't want things touching the white point. Just like in Nuke, I had said, like, you would hover over the pixels and look at the numbers as you hover over them, the RGB levels, and make sure that none of them are actually exceeding pure white or going to pure white, because there is no detail in a white pixel, and it's not visually interesting. It's just flat. It can't even be color corrected. So if I go back over here, what I would do is, well, Premiere also has levels, just like Photoshop has levels. The Adobe stuff has a lot of the same terminology going across its software. And I could go to the white output in RGB. That means all of the channels. You could do it per channel if you wanted to, but typically something you might do to correct this is pull this down. Take the white output and remap it so that the white point is actually sort of a 90% gray, I would say. So you can bring it down to here. Bring it down to here. You'll see a lot of stuff that's even as low as like around an average of 80 with a few spikes going up here. That seems, oops. Yeah, looking at it now, like after you color correct it down, like even if it's going from all the way here to here, it looks a little dangerously low. Like, what could it be? That looks dark. You know what I mean? It only looks dark because it was this bright at first. So I end up cranking it back up to sort of around here or something like that. But the thing is this, if you have that pure white and it's coming off of a screen, especially if it's on a computer or a cell phone, this just glows just like a light source. It's not even like watching a film, it's like looking at a light bulb or something, and it's just overstimulating to watch something like that for an extended amount of time when it's just glowing. So you want to keep your levels easy on the eye. If I come, this is a sort of amateur-ish photograph, but if I go over here, it's very kind on the eyes. This one is just screaming at you, isn't it? If I go over here, you'll see that it's below 90. If I look at it in Nuke has similar tools, and you'll see its readings in the same way. This image is coming in here like right under 90, right? I'm going to go back over here to Premiere. I have this Lumetri Scopes thing. You saw a couple of other diagrams in Nuke. If I right click, I can see different representations of this. That's the waveform. This is a histogram. The parade. Give me a sec. Cool. That leads me to the idea of white balance. One thing you could do. Well, you know what? Let me jump to Nuke for a second. Something I want to emphasize when we talk about white balance. Our old friends, red, green, and blue. We remember that, you know, any image in any image, that per pixel, the way that the image is put together, it has some combination of red, green, and blue that creates the color. Added together, those values that create the color of that pixel, and you can see them change as I scrub over it. So if I come over here and I take a red square or shape or whatever, it's pure red. If I go to its parameters, you can see that actually in RGB there's 1. You know, we're mapping from 0 to 1, so this is pure red. And the same thing for green, same thing for blue. If I take this and move it around and add it together with green, that's what I get. And here you can see what it equals in the overlap when you add them together. And it makes sense, right? I have pure red plus pure green. And if you look down at the pixel readings, it says 1 in red, 1 in green, and the result is yellow. Yeah. And when I add blue into that, just over here, hold on, you can see how that works, right? And then when all three are overlapping, red plus green plus blue, 1, 1, 1, you get white. And you want to be able to think in this way when you're thinking about white balance. So If I go back to Premiere and I look at the amount of red, green, and blue that's in my image, I'm just going to go over here. You know, Ozark. This is a still from Ozark. When you look at Ozark, you know, just if you type it in and just scroll down the basic still images, you can see it has really like this bluish, but really a green tint to the show overall, for whatever aesthetic purposes they chose. So if I come here, I can definitely see that. I can see that there's a bias. There's more green than anything else. And so that also means that when I look at this, you know, when you look at the image, you're going to see, yeah, this right here, these highlights are white, basically. But in the white balance, its bias is pushed towards green. So if we were to white balance this, one thing we could do is, in Premiere, look, we know all the basic color tools, right, in Nuke, but like, you know, it's really interesting. You don't even have to know really what's, you don't have to know this stuff or even memorize it. You can just start searching video effects. Oh, maybe what I'm looking for is in image control. And if you just look at some of the names are arbitrary, but you know, there's stuff we definitely recognize. Color balance, RGB. You just drag it up and say, well, what the heck is that? Okay, cool. Obviously, I have control, some kind of control of how much red, green, and blue is in my image. So if I were to balance this out to bring red, green, and blue to the same level, I would go over here. Well, first I'll try with the blue. Boom. Now, green and blue are pretty much more or less the same level. The red is a little bit behind, isn't it? And if I do it before, after, while I'm looking at the image, I can see that, yep, it does have more of a blue cast, but actually the white looks closer to white, doesn't it, than when it was like this. Now I can really see how that green bias looked. But you know what? The red is still a bit behind. I'm going to turn that up a little bit. Boom. Now, if I go before, after, wow, it has a little bit of pink in certain areas. It looks more like flesh looks and color of flesh. This is more or less a white balanced image, and you can probably bet that it was shot like this, that this is what it looked like before they did any color correction. They then said, you know what, we want to create a mood here. Something eerie is going on, so we're going to make it this sort of greenish blue color tint. Another thing in Premiere, we have very commonly used Lumetri color. Lumetri color, this effect has something in it called white balance selector. And what you could do is, like, it's a sort of quick and dirty way to say, well, what is supposed to be white in this image that's not white? You would get, you know, oh, here's a highlight, right? Technically, maybe you would do it right here, like zoom in close and do it right there. But you know what? I'm just going to grab that. Boom. And there you can see it tries to rebalance the RGB. It did it well with the blue in relation to the green. Red is a bit behind, but you know what? These sort of automatic things are like, you should avoid them. You want to use your knowledge of how to do it manually. Temperature. This, again, like, you could probably find it in the Premiere documentation, but temperature, you could turn it down and technically it's cooler, right? And if I look at this, the blue is increasing. But I don't really know. Look, if I do a before, after, it's going towards the same, sort of in the same direction that I want. But this is arbitrary. We don't know if it's multiplying, literally multiplying, or adding pixel values, or if it's using a curve to do this. Don't really know. That's why it's better to avoid doing things sort of in the Premiere space, which is meant for like in a lot of ways, you know, anyone can just grab Premiere and basically do stuff that basically looks good enough without knowing much about what they're doing. Oh, temperature, coolness. Let's turn it down because down means cooler, right? You know, it's sort of intuitive and meant to be intuitive, but it's in a sort of weird way that doesn't acknowledge the technical things that we know about from Nuke all the time. You know, exposure, we don't know exactly what that means. Maybe if you start analyzing the graph while you do it. Um, but let's see. Other things we have access to here. Let me go back across to Photoshop. Um, if I'll go back to this one. If I go to curves, I can see the same layout of the pixel brightness. Yeah, and if I wanted to do a correction here, I could go boom and do the same thing that I did with levels. Yeah. The thing is here remember I used this graph to talk about white point, black point, contrast, which brings these closer together equally, and to talk about gamma, which is the midtones, everything except everything except pure black and pure white, or white point and black point. Yeah. And remember I talked about how you could turn gamma down to have a contrasty effect without hurting the black point and white point. Boom. All right. Or if something is a bit underexposed, you can kind of, or has some muddy midtones, you can sort of bring them up like this. Not like that. That's why I hate using curves. Yeah, cool. And you could also go over to Premiere, and in the Lumetri color you can find curves as well and do the exact same thing. You could do it per channel. And, you know, nobody taught me this. It's totally intuitive. Once you know the stuff about Nuke, or through Nuke, once you understand the fundamentals and the building blocks of light and color digitally, you can just jump anywhere, and it's really simple to figure out stuff and go into it with a more informed perspective on actually working with it and understanding the potential pitfalls in working with some of this stuff, such as, you know, arbitrary parameters, like, you know, the sorry about that, arbitrary parameters like temperature. Like, we don't know what it's doing to the pixels and to the pixel values. If you're a Nuke, you have the power to, like, really in a granular way, control what's happening at the pixel level. Anyway, let's look at this a little bit more. So I pulled up that RGB parade to do the white balance. Here, if you sort of click this, it rearranges the way that you view these things. So this is the exact same thing. So if I were in Nuke, I could do like a grade and multiply. Now I understand mathematically what's happening with my image, whereas where you just do the color temperature in Premiere, you don't really know what it's doing. So I can like, whoops, go like 1.2 or something. I could open up these wheels and calibrate it that way. Boom. Yeah. Boom. There it goes. And if I were to come over here and I wanted to adjust the hold on. I'm just gonna get rid of this junk. If I were to adjust the exposure or the luminance and try to make it more contrasty, I might grab the white point and pull it down. Now you can see that it's remapped so that the white point is creating a contrastier image. Yeah. And if you know, in the opposite direction, if it was if the white point was too high, I could take it down like that. There's a number of ways you could do it. You could turn down the gain. It really depends what you're trying to achieve with the image. Yeah. Um, I'm gonna go back over to this thing we call a parade. I'm gonna go ahead and adjust it again, but have a look at the histogram. You'll see that when I turn up the blue over here to match, you'll see this also doing its best to align the RGB. And it's doing it, look close, if you look closely, it's aligning them at the white point. See, you see the red going beyond the blue there, but when I get it to what looks right according to the parade, actually you'll see that this too is trying to align them at the white point. So once again, we're getting back to the idea of white balance. So in the part, the white point, the brightest part of the image that is intended to be white, we are getting alignment between R, G, and B. That means, is what I've done here is a general multiplication of the entire image, but you could also do that in the white point only. Remember, in all of the grade stuff, you can do it by channel, and I advised you early in the course not to go playing with stuff by channel because you just don't know what you could be screwing up, and it creates posterization and stuff like that, and the like color separation in the image, and it starts looking weird. You don't really know how to go back and fix stuff if you do encounter a problem because you've done so much to so many micro parameters. But you could open up the white point specifically and color correct that. You could color correct the black point itself specifically if you wanted to preserve the other things that were happening in the image. Earlier in the course, the way I talked to you about dealing with that was to, well, if you're trying to do something like match the treatment of one image to the treatment of another image, zoom into the blacks and hover over them to see how much red, green, or blue is in the blacks, so to help inform you, and also in the whites, the darks and the highlights, to help inform you of how much more you need to correct that image and whether it would be biased towards red, green, or blue. It was probably week 3 or something like that. Cool. Let me see. We also have this other representation of color. These are the commonly used ones. Let's have a look at this one. So we can see that, maybe I'll look at this one. Yeah, so this is really obvious. This is really reddish and yellowish, and if you look at the distribution of the pixels here, you can see that it's towards red and yellow rather than like blue over here. If I go to the Ozark clip, it's more like maybe this yellowish and basically green, right? This yellowish, this bluish, but it's closer to being white balanced, and that's why this stuff is centered. So if I were to go over here and do a grade, you can see that that's really blown out. So I'll do this one like kind of by eye. So look, this image is really too yellow, right? It's not, if we're talking about white balance in general and it being naturalistic, it's pretty yellow, right? How do you get rid of yellow or reduce yellow in an image? You increase blue, right? So I'm going to increase blue a little bit, increase it a lot. Boom, this image is probably too warm, so I'm going to say 0.8 on the red. My axis to warmth is in the red channel, if you recall. Whoops. Yeah, I'm just going to do 8. Boom. So now that's just by eye a lot closer to being a naturalistic sort of color treatment. So If I do this, you can see that all the pixels sort of are on or are towards the red and yellow. If I do this and I say that this image is more white balanced, you'll see that in general in this representation all of the pixels are more centered where it is white. Yeah, cool. Let's see if I can jump back to Premiere for a sec. I'm gonna view this thing. Turn this thing off. You'll see that, like, in Premiere there's similar representations of stuff. You just have less control over it because it's Premiere. It's not a compositing software. What you do have in tandem with Premiere is After Effects. That comes with the Adobe stuff. It is a compositing software. The thing about After Effects is that it is layer based. So it looks like Photoshop. It has layers, and it's really hard to work with stuff like that. Like you would take, let's say you take two images. Let's see, I think I showed you this, but maybe the Adobe license was failing in the classroom. But these are the layering modes that you would find in Nuke to show how to put one thing on top of the other. Let me see, I'll just demo that in Nuke for a second. So these are merges. This is a merge node. It's just set to plus because I want it to literally add stuff. Usually it defaults to over, but it also has overlay, multiply, hard light, color burn, dodge, all these things. It's the same thing as a layering mode in Photoshop. So in Nuke, to put one thing on top of the other, you merge it like this. This A is on top of B, A over B. Remember that, right? In Photoshop, you have a layer on top of another layer, and if you want to make a copy of these or something, and I don't know, merge them on top of something else, you have to do it like this, and then tell it how to interact with the bottom layer. So I'm taking this over this stack, multiplying it by this stack. To do it in Nuke, it's like you can easily see what's happening. But to do something like that in Photoshop, everything is stuck in these layers and these folders and these groups, and you just can't see what you're doing, and you hit a limit where you can't keep that much stuff in perspective anymore very easily. That's how After Effects is to work with. However, After Effects has a bunch of lovely magical buttons that do things sort of very well automatically, and if you know what you're doing, you can make them look really nice. Otherwise, it looks like you just pushed the After Effects button. But now that you know compositing, what I want to emphasize here is that you can sit down for a week or two and literally just learn After Effects by yourself, just by what you know about Nuke and compositing and the basic, the fundamentals and the building blocks of everything. You can open any software that you want and just be like, oh, where's RGB? Oh, RGB is over here. Okay, cool. And do what you got to do. You'll also be able to decipher sort of which tutorials are credible and useful and things of that nature. Let's see. What else do I want to touch on? Like in Photoshop, if I go to image, if I go to, just going to get rid of this junk. Yoink. Just going to get rid of this junk. Oh, whoops, my bad. Just going to do that. Okay. If I go to image adjustments, you're going to find all of our old friends, hue and saturation. They're just tied up in these weird things. Like they just happen to put hue and saturation together. Whereas in Nuke you'll find a saturation node. And here you just have less control over it. But lightness is kind of like a lift in Nuke's grade. What else? We have desaturation, color balance. So, is another way to work with stuff. We have our old friends over here, red, green, and blue. If I jump over to Nuke and I view this thing, you'll see our other friends. It looks like bars and tone, right? But those are the fundamental pieces. You'll see those tones over here too. Those hues over here too. So let's see. I can say, hey, I'm in Photoshop. I took a beautiful still image, and I don't really need to go all the way into Nuke to open a complicated software to deal with it. I just need to touch it up before I put it into my film or wherever it's going to go. And I can say, you know what? This is too yellow. So you remember we talked about complementary colors, right? So that's why these are sort of here next to each other. This image is too yellow. Boom. Now it's closer to a nice white balance, isn't it? But it still could use a little of this. If we look at the flesh tones, they're not that natural. They're kind of pale. They're not warm like flesh. Bring up the red a little bit, and boom. There we go. And if I just undo that, you can see the difference. Again, like, could do the exact same thing over here. Just by exploring the video effects, they're just sort of trapped in weird folders. They have different names, and some of them you don't have the greatest control over, like gamma correction. It just has this number on it. Remember I talked about the midtones that you can fix with that lovely curve. This just has like an arbitrary number, 11. I don't even know what that means, honestly. It has this thing going from 1 to 28. Like, I guess you could Google yourself to death, but like some of this stuff is arbitrary. If you just have the background knowledge and say, you know what, I know what this is doing. This is crunching the midtones as long as it doesn't hurt, the pure black, pure white, where a lot of stuff doesn't get lost in a certain area of an image, then it should be good. You know how to bring it back. Every shot is different. Let's see. What else do we have in here? Color correction. So, technically, color balance RGB is color correction. Why it's not in the color correction folder, I'm not sure. HLS. Like you'll run into stuff like, well, what if I just want to manipulate the saturation? You type this in, there's nothing called saturation, is there? So, you just have to be a little intuitive and say, you know what, it must be somewhere trapped in here. Adjustments, no. Color correction, HLS. That is hue, lightness, saturation. Oh, okay, that looks familiar because it was in the Photoshop one, right? And, you have to go out of your way to, like, find it, but it's there. It's just packaged up differently. Another thing you could do is in Premiere, you can still layer things. So if I put the same thing on top of itself. I'm gonna go here and actually delete what I did on the original. Just gonna delete this junk. Okay, cool. Here's the original. Here's the new one, which is kind of like desaturated. You know what? Go to effects. What you can do is when you double click this thing, you'll also find here in the motion thingamajig. Hold up, no, not motion. In opacity, you'll find blend mode. And it says normal, and it has multiply, color burn, linear burn, all that stuff, just like in Photoshop. Right here where it says normal, color burn, blah, blah. And just like in Nuke's merges. Yeah. So let me go to Premiere and like experiment with try the dodge. Oh my goodness. That looks cool. Yeah. What else can you do? You can, if my memory serves me correctly, try something. In the Lumetri color, in the creative tab, vibrance. This is just funny to me. Like, I don't know what this crap means. You know what I mean? Like, it's not a technical term, really. If I can't even tell by looking at it. Saturation and, anyways, vibrance. Don't know what that means, man. But if you go to look, you can choose like these preset lookup tables and things, or preset looks, you know. These are very cool. They're very cool. But they do things like blow out your image in certain parts. Like, they look really cool, and it's great when you sort of shoot amateur YouTube footage or whatever, and people aren't looking at it for that long, and it's not high stakes. But actually, this is very bad. If I do go over here and start looking at it, there we go. Some of this starts to get dangerous, doesn't it? You know, below 80, it's sort of, because this thing, this is getting close to 100. This thing cannot see sort of the aesthetic part of your film. It can't see every sort of crevice of this thing. But you have this parameter here called intensity, where you can just tone it down a bit. But you know, as I mentioned earlier in the course, if you do too much manipulation of color and saturation, what you get is color separation, and it starts to break up. If you manipulate luminance too much, what happens is that the noise in the image or grain gets revealed. And those are all the artifacts in the image. If you just slap one of these look things on it, or a lookup table or whatever, you might be creating a bad situation that you don't necessarily know about, that you can't necessarily see when you're in Premiere. What else? There's another aspect of this to highlight. I'm gonna do, yeah, maybe I can do it with this. Yeah. If I do a basic correction, let's just say I do something like really obvious, like turn the temperature down. You see this little pen thingamajig? If I draw with it, it's basically, it's a rotoshape. We learned all about rotoscoping. You do have access to some basics here, but if you keep doing stuff like this in Premiere, it's going to get heavy. You want to stay in Nuke for doing stuff like that, or After Effects if you ever learn it. Actually, one interesting thing, oh, by the way, to pull these up, I can't remember if I said it, you just right click here and go to Windows and then New Scope, and you have access to them here. They'll just pop up. But actually, I was doing some master's work in compositing, and I was learning compositing. And actually, the teacher was teaching in After Effects, and I was using Nuke, but we were still able to do that. It's really interesting. But yeah, Nuke, you have these deeper tools and sort of flexibility or whatever. You know? And it's fast. Now I've created a sort of vignette or something. But oh, which reminds me, in Premiere you also have a vignette. Yeah, here goes. You can click, how do you get rid of this mask? You know, nobody taught me this. I mean, click it and hit delete. You know, you can just go in and figure this stuff out. Once you know compositing, you can figure out anything, man. Vignette. Let's see if this works. Ah, yeah. Anyway, cool. That's good. That's good for now. Anything related to digital images, once you understand compositing, you know what I mean? Anything from like doing photography and editing photos to doing Premiere stuff to like After Effects or gaming technology to making a website. Like you can do, if it's digital and it's related to images, uh, you can do it. You can expand in any direction you want. Cool, cool. This is another thing that jumps out. Gaussian blur. Why not highlight it? Filter, like this is universal terminology. We have color and we have filters. Blur is a filter, and here you're going to find Gaussian. You know, you're going to find box. You're going to find those the same algorithms. Um, here's box, right? Yeah, man. So cool. Hope you can take that away from the course. See y'all.